ultimately, we're there for litigation support. My job, first and foremost, for you, Mr. Attorney, is to make you look very good because you have a client. Ultimately, you are working for someone else, right? We are hand in hand, but ultimately understand we cannot do what you do. You practice the law, you've been doing this for 20 years, but you cannot do what I do. You cannot extract information. You have certain guidelines and things that you have to follow. And ultimately, you're never going to be the guy that's going to wear out his leather shoes, going from door to door and getting that real information and finding those witnesses, for example.
Brian, again, I know you're a busy guy. Thanks for popping on the camera. I'm excited to hear a little more from a day in the life of Brian Bauer and the PHENIX team.
Absolutely. Good to see you.
I'm just going to dive right into it. So obviously I'm doing a lot of marketing for you, and I look and see your customers and the sales you make to them. What is going on from your side when you talk to an attorney, start off small, and then goes big?
Yeah. Great question. Typically what we see a lot of the times is an attorney will call specifically with one or two line items. Hey, we need to know this. Hey, we want you to do one door knock. Here's our prime suspect, or here's what information we think that they might have. And as you go along and you educate the attorney, we know as experienced investigators, a good investigation always starts here and it always gets bigger, not smaller. And so oftentimes when I take a small retainer, I know as I go do that door knock and I talk to one individual, they're going to give you 3 additional names, right? And then you're going to go talk to those people and that's going to blow up and they're going to give you more information. And as I say, you shake the apple tree, but sometimes some of the apples fall out that you can't throw back up into the tree, right? And so oftentimes as that information comes out, not only is it great information, but whoa, this is completely leading us down another path. And so a good investigator, ultimately, if they do a good job, is always going to get larger.
Does this go back to the idea of maybe a more novice investigator would be an order taker and say, hey, the order is go knock on Jerry Johnson's door. I'm going to go do that and then tell you what he said. Whereas you might say, hey, Jerry said this, this, and this. You need to go pull those threads.
Yeah, I think oftentimes in talking with attorneys, and I would coach attorneys up to say, hey, understand as an investigator, if you want the investigator to be aggressive and do a really good job, but stay within the guardrails, you really have to not handcuff the investigator and give him an opportunity to understand the information. I was transferred by an investigator not too long ago by an attorney that was just, hey, I want the price. Why can't you give me the price? Hey, let me talk to your owner to get the price. And so calmly as he's like, hey, I'm really frustrated. I just can't get the price. And I said, well, Fred, hey, the bottom line is I was just arrested and accused of murder. I need to hire you. How much? Right?
Yeah.
And so there was a pause and he said, okay, touche, Brian, right? And so
got me there.
Point well taken, right? And so I think lots of investigators are overly concerned about what that attorney might view or think that they're outside the scope. But the reality is, hey, help me understand the case as much as possible. Put your investigative hat on when you're talking to that attorney, right? Understand the mission. And if you don't understand the mission, there's no such thing as a stupid question, right? And so if you're intimate and you understand it, when you are active in the field and performing that interview and that information comes up and all the other cast and characters, that's going to be the difference between a good interview and a great interview.
That makes a lot of sense. So does it sound like if an attorney reaches out to an investigator and that investigator isn't doing a deep discovery process, that should be an alarm bell?
Yeah, exactly. I coach all my people to view it this way. When you go see the doctor doesn't say, oh, you have a knee problem? I'm going to give you one or two choices to fix your knee problem. They're going to say, well, tell me about how long it's been going on, a degree of 1 to 10. How badly does it hurt? What's your mobility? They're going to ask all of those questions before they ultimately give you a diagnosis. And it's very similar as an investigator. Know what you're asking, know all the information before you give your diagnosis.
Yeah, and it just like every profession on earth, the more experienced person knows what questions to ask and what threads could be opened up. You're able to have more foresight in the case than other people might.
For me, it's very easy because I just put on my investigative hat and I'm very inquisitive and saying, no, hold up. I understand you want me to go ahead and do this, but hey, you understand this information like breathing air because you've been working on it for a very long time. I don't know that. So slow down. Hey, I have lots of questions. I'm just sometimes intrigued and fascinated with it and want to add. And hey, ultimately, what's the mission? And at the end of the day, what is the best case scenario outcome for you? Right. So I can better hit the bullseye and get that outcome for you.
You say the word outcome a lot, and I think in the marketing world that has a really deep meaning for me is because people sell checked boxes and deliverables, but in reality, all anybody wants is an outcome. And you seem extremely outcome oriented when you do these investigations.
Yeah, I just down to the simplest investigations, and thanks for that. But ultimately, hey, I just need to locate this individual. Okay, great. This is how we do it. Okay, versus saying, okay, let's take a step back. Why do we want to locate this individual? Oh, well, they're a star witness in a multi-million-dollar product liability suit, and if we could find this individual, hey, this would, potentially make our case. Okay, well, now let's talk about it, right? And so that has so much value and merit to know, oh, well, did you know, how about instead of just locating him because it's privileged under you, let's go perform an interview and make sure that he's not going to say really bad things about us as well. But if he goes and says really good things, right there and then I can get a written statement from him. We can get in an affidavit form later. We can massage that how we want, get that signed, and lock that person up before they're in a deposition with 10 suits and they're all puckered up and maybe they don't say the same thing, right?
Yeah, a lot of time when you talk about investigating attorneys, what that means might be that like they'll come to you with this specific task and you let them know, hey, if you give me more information and a little bit longer leash, I can take this case a lot further than you've asked me to this point.
Ultimately, we're there for litigation support. My job, first and foremost, for you, Mr. Attorney, is to make you look very good because you have a client. Ultimately, you are working for someone else, right? We are hand in hand, but ultimately understand we cannot do what you do. You practice the law, you've been doing this for 20 years, but you cannot do what I do. You cannot extract information. You have certain guidelines and things that you have to follow. And ultimately, you're never going to be the guy that's going to wear out his leather shoes, going from door to door and getting that real information. And finding those witnesses, for example.
Obviously, there's discretion and professionalism in everything you do because you have to stay in business for as long as you have, but you have more latitude than attorneys do to do what needs to be done to get the information you need.
There's certain ethical guidelines that attorneys need to follow. And not that we're a bull in a china shop, but, we certainly understand what those guidelines are and always trying to, make it better, than worse, certainly. But oftentimes we are the insulation for the attorney and we can get that information. And so out of one side of the mouth is like, hey, we really need a pit bull. We really need somebody that's aggressive. And then the other side of the mouth is, hey, but let's be careful and not get us into any, legal situation. And, I pride myself after 30 years never being involved in a lawsuit and being sued after the tens of thousands of investigations that we've performed. So.
Can you maybe give an example of one of these times where an attorney's called with like, hey, Brian, here are, some marching orders for you guys, A, B, and C, and the case through education and discovery turned into much bigger and much wider than it originally started?
That's probably 75% of our cases ultimately, but we one in particular, and we just wrapped this up a few months back. The founder sold his business, appointed a CEO to run that. He was a minority owner, and after years, the CEO ran it into the ground. Ultimately, the founder came back and reinvested tens of millions of dollars into this business, to where the CEO tried to do an end around and a power play with the board of directors to oust this founder and basically steal the company out from underneath him. And so they had been in litigation for 2 years. The exposure was about $25 million. They hired us specifically for one item, which was to look in to see, because they believed that they were spending so much in marketing and the needle wasn't moving in a positive direction, that somehow he was involved on these kickbacks. And they thought, look, if we could get something criminal on him, this and that, to show wrongdoing. And as we started to dig into that, their primary marketing spend was with Google AdWords. So there was no kickback there as it relates to Google. But as we started to interview ex-employees, and that's one of the tricks, is go to find the woman scorn, go find the, ex-employee that didn't like necessarily how he was terminated and maybe have an axe to grind. And so as we started to look into that more and more, we didn't find any of what they hired us to do, but what we did find was master manipulation of books, defrauding financial institutions, creating tens of thousands of dummy accounts to get additional loans and things. And so at the end of the day, with interviews and affidavits, we were able to boot this CEO out with a massive amount of leverage for next to nothing. And they could have litigated this to the cows came home on the facts, and ultimately it would have ended in some eight-figure type of settlement. I think that their spend might have been $30K with us. So at the end of the day, although $30K sounds a lot, we were at a logjam at $25 million, and at the end of the day, probably spent a few $1 million in legal fees over the course of those 2 years. And so that's a prime example of, if done right, hire the right investigator to get the information. Just tremendous leverage.
Yeah, so 30,000 is a micro drop in the bucket on a case like that. Brian, this was awesome. Let's wrap up, but I'm looking forward to chatting with you again. Thanks for the stories and the expertise.
Awesome. Pleasure as always. Thanks, buddy. Take care.
All right, see you, Brian.
Thanks.